relatively new. So been 7 months now at Sjsu, and it's been a really awesome and nice time for me. To his second question in terms of where I did my undergrad and grad schooling, I think for my undergrad it's a little bit complicated because I did it in 3 different continents. So yeah, for my undergrad, my major was civil engineering, and I started out in Africa, in Nigeria, at Covenant University, and then kind of transferred a bit to Teesside University in the UK, and then transferred to Wayne State University in Michigan. So just 3 different places gave me 3 different ideas about civil engineering cultures and stuff like that. And then for my grad school, both my master's and PhD program, I decided to sit down one place and do it instead of roaming around. And I did that at Wayne State over in Michigan. And then to your last question on the challenge I had to overcome with in order to be successful in grad school was actually not having any time to play or mess around or anything like that, which other people might have been fortunate to have, and things of that nature, because especially during my master's, part of my scholarship requirement was I have to maintain a certain GPA if I want to get scholarship the next semester. So I had to get a GPA greater than 3.5. So at the end of each semester, I'm always anxious, I'm always nervous, because did I get that 3.5 or did I go above 3.5? Are they going to give me scholarship next semester or not? So that always kept me on my feet every time to make sure I'm doing the work, I'm attending classes, I'm talking to the professors, so I can get good grades and ensure that I have a scholarship the following semester. But I think all that kind of went away when I went into the PhD program. I could breathe like a normal human being. So that's a little bit about me, dear Mark.
Thank you, Professor Etu. Going on to our next panelist, we have Christine Helens.
Hi, everyone. I'm in the psychology department here. It's my 3rd year. And in terms of my educational background, I went to undergrad over at Berkeley, and then I did my grad school at UC Santa Barbara, followed by 2 postdocs at Harvard. And I was an assistant professor at a small liberal arts college down in Southern California called the University of Laverne before I came up here. So in terms of my biggest challenge as a grad student, I feel like, and post-grad, I feel like it's because the schools that I've been part of during my training and now as a professor, they've all been a part of like the most expensive cities in the country to live in. So like, Santa Barbara, ridiculously expensive. Boston, which I thought would be cheaper. I don't know why, because I guess I'm from California and I just assumed cold winter coast town would be cheaper. But no, Boston was even more expensive than Santa Barbara, if you can believe it. And then obviously everyone knows how expensive San Jose is. So I think just coming to terms and grappling with the very like regionally specific like cost of living standards and adjusting to like the price of housing and things like that is probably the biggest challenge as a grad student, and honestly something that I have not gotten over yet as a professor. So it's still something I think a lot of us probably grapple with, being in the Bay Area.
Thank you, Professor Helens. Next up, we have Christine Vega.
Hi, everyone. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Christine Vega. I am brand new faculty. I've been here 7 months in Chicanx Studies. So my undergrad, I was a community college transfer student and went into UCLA for BAs in Chicano Studies and Gender Women Studies. Then I went to the University of Utah for a master's in education, went to UC, got to come home. I'm from LA, so I got to go home for my PhD in education, and then did 2 postdocs at CSU Fort Collins and at the University of Denver. So I moved around a lot out of state, and I'm sure we'll touch on negotiating funding when you're an out-of-state student, which changes those dynamics. And they were, I think Denver and Utah were probably more affordable, but there's also other resources in terms of like housing, especially for families, and did a lot of work around parenting students. So kind of learned a lot of the ropes around self-advocacy for housing, especially when you're on a budget and when you're a grad student. And one of the challenges that I faced financially was, in order for me to come back to Los Angeles for my PhD, I didn't have full funding secured. I only had 1 year of funding secured, and then the rest I would have to find RAs, or which are like residential assistants positions, or GSRs, which we call at UCLA, which the name changes according to the institution, graduate research assistantships. Those cover your tuition and also provide a stipend each month. But the biggest challenge for me was living in LA. And I became a parent after my first year of my PhD. So then I took out a lot of loans to survive and navigate the institution, in addition to having multiple jobs. So I usually had 1 or 2 jobs on campus. And I was a consultant at some point at the same time during summers while I was writing a dissertation and raising a child with my partner. And he was also a PhD student. So as you can tell, there's a lot of navigating around that, but I learned a lot about ways that I can try to get funding to support my studies. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Professor Vega. And last but not least is Yolanda Wiggins.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Yolanda Wiggins, and I'm an assistant professor in the Sociology and Interdisciplinary Social Sciences Department. I've been at SJSU for about 1.5 years now, so this is like the start of my second year, my first year on the West Coast. And well, I guess I still teach virtually, but just physically on the West Coast. I should say I earned my PhD in 2020, and I was also on the academic job market in 2020, right at the start of the pandemic. So that was not fun. I'm an East Coaster, originally from Washington, DC. I attended West Virginia University and majored in political science and economics. I thought I was going to law school, but then I went straight from undergrad into a sociology PhD program at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. I guess I should first say that I think this panel is super necessary because I think it's one of the things less talked about in discussions of graduate school and just the graduate school process in general, and it just needs to be demystified, the financial aspects associated with it. I would say that one financial challenge that I had to overcome for success in graduate school was finding funding during the summer months, when my graduate assistantship funding was only for an eight-month period, or during the academic year. This is something that graduate programs, they don't explicitly share with you when you enter graduate school, even though it might be, explicitly stated in your graduate assistantship contract if you have one. And I also would say that another challenge for me was supporting myself financially while waiting for my first stipend to, hit my bank account. Coming into graduate school, I had some money saved up, but coming straight from undergrad, I didn't have a ton. And so really kind of navigating how to sustain myself, how to pay rent, because that's still due, how to pay for books, how to pay for food and other basic necessities.
Wonderful. Thank you, Professor Wiggins. That's great. I'm really excited about this panel. I think this is going to be a great conversation, and I appreciate what you said about the importance of this topic. I think it is underappreciated, and I'm really glad that we have an opportunity to talk about it. So I think we need to start with the basics. And so the very first question that I'd like to ask the panelists to talk about is, what kinds of funding sources exist for supporting graduate education? So whoever would like to start.
I could go first. So I think it basically just depends on what side of the spectrum you look at it. If you're a US citizen, then I think in terms of graduate school, apart from the fact that you could easily access maybe student loans and things like that to support you, that's one way. But if you're an international student, which I am, the student loan is not an option for you because we're not allowed to get faster and all those different things. So I'm 100% sure that most international students here are either banking on loans from their home country or family support kind of loans to support them through school. And then for those of them coming from a different country, when you graduate and you get a job in your home country, if maybe you tell your employer that you want to go to graduate school, some of those employers might kind of sponsor you a little bit through graduate school. So those are kind of like some of the sources of funding when you look at it from an international perspective. And also from a citizenship perspective, apart from the FAFSA loans and all those kind of B2 loans, I know the National Science Foundation, for example, gives out research assistantships and stuff like that, or fellowships to graduate students who directly apply to them for, I think, either a 4 or 5 year period for all of that. And then a potential source of funding, which I'm sure my colleagues here have been opportune to get over our graduate school, is maybe teaching assistantship or research assistantships. So.
Thank you, Professor Attu. And you've covered a lot there. So, but there are maybe other things that other members of the panel would like to chime in on. Anyone else want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say, one, this question is super tough because there are some funding sources that have existed for years and years and years, and then others might be a one-time funding opportunity, and then some may be grandfathered out, but there is money out there, a lot of it. It's just a matter of kind of like knowing where to find it. And this is really where making connections with faculty in your program, even outside of your program, and even staff on campus comes in. Many of these folks are aware of available funding sources that exist, and they can point you in the right direction of opportunities to apply for, or you know, they also might be on the lookout for graduate students to hire. The point, I'd say, is really to be on somebody's radar so that they can keep you in mind. The other thing is to be mindful of is that there might be small pots of money offered through SJSU, for example, or local organizations in the area. And honestly, these small pots of money can add up, especially if you get enough. And then to Dr. Attu's point, there are national awards from the National Science Foundation, for example, that support graduate education. And then lastly, I would just suggest taking some time to do a simple Google search, talking to people in your program, your peers, friends, faculty, staff who also might be in graduate school themselves, and asking them how they financially put themselves through graduate school. And sometimes it's also useful to review people's CVs online and get a sense of the sources of funding that they received when they were in graduate school. People do list those on their CVs, and I found that it was super helpful. And sometimes when you reach out to those people, they're more than happy to, you know, take a little bit out of their day and talk to you.
Thank you, Professor Wiggins. I notice that Professor Attu has put a couple of links in the chat, so I just wanted to alert everybody to that. Also, I'll say that as we get close to the end of this question session, I also have some links that I'll put in there that can serve as resources that you can review after the meeting. So we'll get to that a little bit later. Does anyone else want to add any thoughts about kinds of funding sources that exist to support graduate students?
Sure, I can take, I'll give some tips on that. So there's two different kinds of funding, or probably multiple kinds of funding that exist. The most common ones are extramural funding, which is within the institution, and there's outside of the institution, and intramural funding that's outside of the institution. Oftentimes, master's programs don't necessarily always fund your degrees. It's really important to, again, self-advocate, ask questions. I usually tell my students who are applying to grad school, you want to apply to multiple grad school programs, because I use that as leverage for negotiations to cover my funding, because I was being recruited to go out of state, right? And so it's always really important to just throw your net out there, right? And see what's available for you, because as a student, you want to make sure that you can be in as little debt as possible. And so that's one way to also consider the way you apply to schools, is you have to think about the funding, right? I was lucky enough that my master's program at the University of Utah, the College of Education, was willing to provide a stipend and also a TA-ship. So then I came in with a little bit of more funding that I would have if I would have stayed in California. And so, like, just making sure that you ask a lot of questions, and very much like Professor Wiggins mentioned, talking to your own professors, your own, even if they're either not your professors or folks that you've heard of on campus, ask those questions. Like, how did you pay for grad school? Because everybody has a different journey. I also want to say that sometimes in our CVs, we don't reflect when we've been rejected from the funding opportunities, right? And I think it's really important what Dr. Wiggins is saying, that look at the CVs, but still ask questions if they apply to anything else that they may have not gotten. Because I applied to everything from the Ford Foundation to AAUW, which stands for the American Association of University Women, to the Spencer, and I forget which other one, and I didn't get them, but I got feedback from those rejections. And so the students that came to seek information about like my application process, I was like, this is what you should do and this is what you shouldn't do, right? And so I was able to guide them according to the mistakes I made in my application. And also, parenting scholarship back in the day wasn't as popular as it is now, right? So now this kind of scholarship is being funded, whereas before it wasn't so much like a hot topic. So it's always about like, how do you frame your work? But it's like asking those questions to your mentors and mentors, right? And I think the last thing I'm gonna do a plug-in, and I'll put it on the chat, is this is if you're pursuing a PhD or doctorate degree. It's the Chancellor's Doctoral Incentive Program, and it's actually housed under CSU. I was able to get that CDIP. They provide loans for you, and if you get hired at a CSU, they're forgiven, and that's what happened to me. So I was very lucky for that. So if you're considering like a doctoral degree in any field, you can definitely tap folks at the CSU to be mentors and advocate on your behalf, and you get all these different resources and advocacy to support and elevate you in your trajectory to higher education. So I'll put that in the chat just in case any of y'all are thinking about that. And they offer other programs too. The CDIP program offers different kinds of funding.
Thank you so much, Professor Vega. I'm really glad that you mentioned the Chancellor's Doctoral Incentive Program. That's something that we actually work with in our College of Graduate Studies office. So if anybody is interested in pursuing a PhD and wants to explore this possibility, please contact us. We can certainly provide information in addition to what Professor Vega is going to put in the chat. So thank you so much for that. Anyone else want to comment on sources of funding for graduate student study? All right. Why don't we go ahead and move on then to our second question. As we all know, one of the ways in which we all can fund our education is to do work. We can work to pay for our bills, but not all kinds of work are equal. Some are definitely better than others while you're a graduate student. So the question is, what are the best kinds of work to support your education? And how do you get these jobs? Who would like to start with that one?
I can start. I feel like in graduate school, I was one of those people who I literally worked 4 jobs. Some were remote. I was a TA, but actually this is the first time in my life that I've had literally 1 job. But in a perfect world, I would say that the best kinds of work to support your education, and my dissertation chair, she told me this as well, is work that aligns with your larger career goals. Again, if you can. I know that we as people, we need money to survive. And if you don't have that, then it just, detracts away from the attention that you can put into focusing on your graduate studies. But if you can, though, it would be ideal to find employment that connects with where you think you want to go or where you see yourself going next. So thinking about the bigger picture, work that both generates income, but also checks, both boxes. I would say, so sometimes, people might put these sorts of opportunities like on your radar, but I've also found other times, it might take legwork on your own. LinkedIn, the Chronicle of Higher Education, national associations for your particular discipline. So I'm a sociologist, so looking at the job boards listed under the American Sociological Association, but also I've been finding that there's so many Facebook groups related to different interests and identity groups. So there's a first gen collective for sociologists, and a lot of people plug in various opportunities in those Facebook groups for junior faculty like myself, but also graduate students as well. And a lot of these places will sometimes hold a space for you for the coming summer if you secure an internship, or even continue to employ you throughout the academic year and work around your schedule as a student. So I'd say in a perfect world, ideally the best kind of work to support your graduate education is something that will allow you to launch your next steps, your future steps, where you might see yourself going next.
Thanks, Professor Wiggins. Any other panelists want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that, because I think, especially if you want to go into the way I see it in terms of the type of job, I feel like the 2 main routes are either industry or academia, right? So if you ultimately want to go to either a PhD program or academic context, I feel like there are few things better than a teaching assistantship or a lectureship, right? Because oftentimes those are accompanied by tuition remission, and by eliminating the tuition, you could essentially take care of an enormous amount of your expenses. So even if they don't pay very well, if they forgive your tuition, or if they drastically cut your tuition, I feel like those kinds of teaching jobs can really help make graduate school worth your while. But if you ultimately want to go into industry, one of the things I didn't realize until I got to grad school was that as soon as you are in grad school, if you could say you're in a graduate program, you could become a consultant for no matter what your field is. So I remember I was my first year in grad school, and there was a local organization who were trying to study something, and my advisor just said, you should just go be a consultant for them. And I was like, well, I've never been a consultant before. He's like, it doesn't matter, you're getting an advanced degree, you're gonna know more than they know, just offer your services. And I asked him things like, well, how much am I supposed to charge? And the number he suggested was way higher than what I was expecting. And the idea was, well, even if you're not necessarily there, even if you don't necessarily have the initials already behind your last name, by the mere fact you're enrolled and you're doing well, it really qualifies you for a lot of, consulting type jobs that I think, at least at that point in my life, I didn't realize I was even qualified for. So just sort of thinking outside the box and realizing, oh, hey, there may be things that I didn't used to think I was qualified for, but now that I'm in this position, now that I'm in this program, I may be able to speak to or help, businesses or local groups with, and doing your research on how much consultants normally charge for those kinds of services, I think can be really helpful, and to not be afraid to essentially command what other people doing similar things are commanding, even if you have a little of that imposter syndrome feeling going on, where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm requesting that they pay me this much per hour. But if I think people will be surprised how much the industry standards are for things like consulting and offering your services, whether it's helping local organizations, do a study or, get a project underway or sort of assess and analyze what they've done already. I think there's a lot of, opportunities there, especially if you want to, ultimately work in industries like that.
Wow, that's a great suggestion, Professor Helens. I think that's the first time I've heard someone suggest that in a graduate student funding panel, and I think it's a wonderful idea. And I just have to tell you, when I didn't do that as a graduate student myself, because I didn't have a mentor as wise as you, but I did start consulting a little bit when I was a new faculty member. And you're absolutely right. The amount of money that you can make in a relatively short period of time is quite eye-popping. So it can be a very efficient use of your time if you're able to get one of those engagements. So definitely something to consider. I think it's a little field dependent. In some kinds of fields, you're not going to be valued as a consultant until you do have a credential. But I think if you have a skill set that is widely needed, then the credential doesn't matter if you have the skill set. So I think that's a wonderful idea. Thank you. Anyone else want to chime in to the question of kinds of work that might be available and what the best kinds are?
Yeah, I can maybe chime in from an international student perspective, but I 100% agree with what Dr. Wiggins has stated and what Dr. McCallums have also stated. But I think from international student perspective, everyone knows when you get into the country, the minute you step foot here, you're restricted to the kind of work you could do and stuff like that. You dare take work outside campus that is not CPT or OPT, you're going back home, buddy. It's as simple as that. So your work is kind of restricted within the school walls. So basically, if you could look for things around being a student assistant or being teaching assistant or research assistant, as we have stated earlier, those are like super good opportunities. And then I think from experience, one thing I discovered was like some of my colleagues at Wayne State who came in with like scholarship opportunities or scholarships for their master's or PhD programs, fully funded. The minute they decided that, okay, they wanted to do internship or go for like OPT and stuff like that, they stopped getting funding because they were like, that's not why we brought you here. You're here to do research and all those different things. So the minute you start going out to say you want to do OPT and all those different things, the university is like, okay, now you have to pay your tuition by yourself because you want to work 40 hours and all those different things. And then I think for international students, during the summer is also a huge challenge because you have to think, okay, how do I get money to pay my bills and all those different things? And during the summer, you could work 40 hours, right? And with 40 hours, you could work multiple jobs. So what I did in grad school was to not only be like a TA for one of the summer courses for professor, but I was also able to work 2 different jobs of being a STEM instructor for high school and middle school kids. So that the money I was paid there was like $40 an hour. So that was bringing in a whole lot of money than what I was getting as a TA for a week. And I was like, okay, I'm a ball hat, but no, I didn't ball hat though. But for an international student, those are some ways you could get some work to support your education.
Great, thanks, Professor Itu. That's an important perspective about the work restrictions for international students. Does any other panelist want to comment on the work issue? So then maybe I'll just say a couple of words about SJSU. So at SJSU, it is possible to serve as a teaching associate if you're a graduate student, and it is also possible in principle to serve as a research assistant if you're a graduate student. So the teaching associate positions do come with a tuition waiver of the in-state portion of the tuition if you are employed more than a certain number of hours per week. So that's a very valuable benefit, as I think it was Professor Helens pointed out. So if you are able to get that kind of work, that really pays not only in terms of the multiplication effect by getting the tuition remission, but also it aligns with, I think it was what Professor Wiggins said, of being really resonant with your studies. And so it's something that can really advance your professional development as well as give you some money to put food on the table. So the question is, how do you get a TA position? And the answer is you have to go to the chair of the department in which your program sits, where you are qualified to teach. Now, not all departments use TAs, so it may not work in your department, but if you have the qualifications to teach a particular undergraduate course in a place where they employ TAs, then you need to basically put your name in the ring, and the person who you need to talk to is the department chair, because they're the person who hires the TAs typically. There are some departments that have someone else do it, but usually it's the department chair. For research assistantships, what you do is you get paid by someone who has an extramural grant to do a particular research project. And if you have the skills to be able to participate in that research project, that's one of the best ways to be paid, because oftentimes the research that you do for the pay also can double as research that you can use for your culminating experience, like a thesis if you're a master's student. And so that's a way. You don't get the tuition remission, but you get funding and you make real progress on your project. So those are two that align well with your educational goals. And so I would suggest that you consider those if they're appropriate for your skill set. I see there's a question in the chat, is it too late in the semester to look for TAs or research assistant roles? Well, research assistant roles typically roll all times of year, so you should definitely approach the faculty member who is doing the research to ask about that. Usually that works best if you are part of their research enterprise already, or if you join their research enterprise. And not all faculty members have extramural funding, which has written into it support for research assistants. So it's a little bit of a catch as catch can. So you need to just ask the faculty members. And with the TAs, it's very close to too late, but I don't think it is completely too late. There might be a couple of departments that are still trying to fill out some slots, so it's worth an ask, but I would not wait if that's something you want to pursue. Any other thoughts about work? All right, let's move on to the third question. It is sometimes necessary to go into debt to fund your graduate education, but it is definitely the case that not all kinds of debt are equal. For example, you do not want to fund your graduate education on your credit cards. But there are lots of nuances here. And so I just wanted to ask the panel if they could please tell us about, while we understand that going into debt is best to avoid, if it's necessary, what are the best kinds of debt to undertake? Any takers on that one?
I'd say maybe the better kinds of debt are taking out loans with the Department of Education, if you qualify for that, rather than private loan companies. And the reason why I'm saying this is because the interest rates for federal loans are typically lower than other loan companies where the interest rates can fluctuate. But yeah, I think that's the only bit I can offer on that question.
All right, thank you. That's important. Anyone else want to add anything?
I think for international students, we all know you can't get any loans here in the US, except if you have family members who can act as guarantors for you. So and I've kind of experienced that. My brother is over at Wayne State doing his PhD, and there was a time where his scholarship got taken away and we had to look at getting a loan, and we discovered that as an international, you can't get a loan or whatsoever. So basically you have to just maybe depend on family. If you get a loan from family, you know you're not getting, even if you're in a debt to a family member, you don't have to pay any interest if your family members are so nice like that. But if they're not, then I don't have any comments to say. So that is probably the only thing I know. And then I know a couple of friends of mine who are from India and did get like a government loan for school in order for them to move here. And I think the interest rate too was pretty good. So if you come from those kind of countries where you could get a loan from your home country for a really good rate, that would be good. But generally for international students here, you don't get a loan. So getting into debt might just be your credit card debt for personal expenses and not for tuition related expenses. So yeah.
Okay, thanks. I have a couple things I'll add to that, but I want to get other panelists if they want to chime in before I do.
Yeah, I'll go. So there's also a difference between like subsidized loans, which do not accrue interest while you're in school, at least half of the time or more, and even during like deferment periods, right? And then there's unsubsidized loans that are both for like undergrad and grad school, sometimes even community college, which I highly don't recommend pulling those out, right? I mean, you're already at the four-year institution, but if you're around younger folk, family members or relatives, sometimes they get offered loans, right? But the unsubsidized loans are they're not based on financial need, right? And so there is an interest that is charged, you know, during school, during deferment and grace periods. So I think when I was in grad school, I don't know how the policies and laws have changed since, but all our grad loans became unsubsidized at some point, and that was really hard. So we didn't qualify for subsidized loans. So if you have to take out loans, those are like the subsidized are probably the best. And again, like this whole hustle, right, of these RA-ships, opportunities on campus are probably the best way to go. So I'll pause there in case you want to add more to that, Mark or Dr. McKillams.
Sure, thank you. Did anybody else, any of the other panelists want to chime in, or shall I just go ahead and? So just to summarize then, so I think several of you have hit on a couple of points that I just want to emphasize. One of them is that the best kind of loan is the one that has the lowest interest rate and the one that defers the payment of interest on the longest possible. And currently, if you are not an international student, then I think they're called Stafford Loans, which are the subsidized loans that Professor Wiggins and Professor Vega were talking about. And those can be arranged through our financial aid and scholarship office. And then there are unsubsidized loans, which typically would have a little bit higher interest rate, but are also reasonable, certainly much more reasonable than a credit card loan or even just a straight bank loan. The Stafford loans, last time I checked, and I'm not an expert on this, but the last time I checked, do not charge interest while you're a student. And then the interest begins to accrue after you graduate. So I believe that is really a great benefit. So if you have to take a loan and those are available to you, that's where I would go first. And then the second point, I wanted to get to Professor Sjsu's point about international students. And I also saw that there was a question for international students in the chat. And I just want to say that the rules for international students are different than for non-international students, and also they're very complex. And so I am very uncomfortable often, you know, people ask me all the time questions like this, and my answer is almost always the same, which is, you know, I think I know, but I'm not going to say because they're complex. The place to go is there's a international scholars and support services. I can't remember what the name is, but it's ISSS on our campus. It is our international office. And those folks are really expert in helping international students understand what they can legally do and what they cannot legally do without imperiling their visa. And so if you have any kinds of questions about what you can and can't do as an international student. That I always encourage people to go to ISSS, which is, they have some really wonderful professionals there that can help you understand exactly what the rules are. So that would be my recommendation here at SJSU. All right, any other topics about loans from the panel right now before we move on to our next question? All right. So now I'd like to maybe switch a little bit to talking about sort of personal finances. When someone goes to graduate school, especially if they were working before they went to graduate school, there's a readjustment that is necessary in terms of personal finances. And so I thought the panelists could maybe share some experiences or some thoughts about how you manage or adjust your personal finances while you're a graduate student. And also, if you did do some things as a graduate student financially that you regret and you're not unwilling to share, what would you do differently to maybe smooth out some of the financial bumps that you hit?
I can give a fairly idiosyncratic example, but I think applies to a lot of cities across America, which was when I went to my postdoc, the first year, which was in Boston, the first year I got the job offer like fairly late. And so I had like very little time to find housing. And so I essentially, and especially in major cities, I imagine San Jose is similar, like housing is sort of difficult to come by, especially affordable housing. So I essentially just paid an astronomical amount of money. It was like close to $3,000 for like a studio. And I just didn't know anything else. So I just did it, and I have regretted it ever since, because once I got there, I very quickly realized that, especially in major progressive cities, that whatever you are making on your graduate student salary, you are definitely at the poverty level or close to poverty level. So different cities have different adjustments for this, right? So I encourage you, wherever you are living, to look up what is considered low or moderate income per your city, and then figure out what kind of like housing options they have for those. Because after my first year, I very quickly realized that the city of Cambridge had like low and moderate income housing that were literally like one block down from where I was living, and was like a third to a quarter of what I was paying. And it was a fairly straightforward process of applying, demonstrating you are truly as poor as you say you are, and getting in. And I know this is very like city dependent, but I suspect a lot of cities have these kinds of programs. And I know now post-pandemic it might be a little harder because a lot of people may be in the need for housing, but certainly like looking, because for the longest time I just thought, well, it's either university housing or you find housing on your own. But really, especially in I think more progressive states or more progressive counties, there are a lot of sort of local, regional level support for things like housing. And beyond housing, even for things like, depending on if you have a family or if you have children, or even for food, there's like community gardens and co-ops that could really take a dent out of your grocery bill, that you can join. There's even, depending on the city you live in, but there's like even like local groups that do like swaps for like children's clothes or like toys, where if you don't have the budget to buy like your kids' clothes and toys, there's community groups that will purposely allow you to like swap things out. So especially for those of you with families, I think those are great resources. I mean, now on Facebook and probably on Instagram, there's like a lot of buy nothing groups where people can essentially, give away and receive things as they need. And so I think, and I didn't know about most of these things when I was in grad school. So I think if I knew more, I would realize, wow, like when it comes to my everyday expenses, there's actually a lot more opportunities to sort of minimize them than I originally had thought possible. So I just encourage you to sort of look around there.
That's
Yeah,
great.
I'm gonna echo that. I just recently came from Massachusetts, and I was unaware as a graduate student that there were food assistance programs. Graduate students qualify for food stamps, subsidized housing, like Dr. Christine said. What else? Utility bill subsidies. It gets super cold in Massachusetts, you crank up the heat, your heat bill can skyrocket. So I was totally unaware of any of those services available to me until after I moved. And Dr. Vega, she talked about the hustle, and I remember mentioning to you all that I worked a lot as a research assistant, interning in the summer, teaching summer online classes, serving as a graduate TA during the school year, and I was exhausted. So if I could do it all over again, I don't know if I could do it another way, because to be quite honest, you know, I still had to support myself, but really thinking about and keeping in mind that although you're getting paid as a graduate student, if you have a graduate assistantship, it's still, you know, maybe slightly above the poverty line, but it's still like extremely low. So thinking about ways that you can supplement your income. And for example, if you're a student who also has a family, or you provide care to, you know, other family members, it's super challenging. So if anyone has any suggestions on managing personal finances, I'm always happy to get glean some other suggestions and advice.
Yeah, thanks, Professor Wiggins. Anyone else want to chime in? Other
Yeah,
tips?
Sorry. I want to echo what was said earlier as well. Like, I agree with all of that, right? This is what's like, we have to be like really intentional about when you get accepted into an institution, right? They definitely ask the hard questions, like, where are you going to live? Especially like for me as a parent, first year parent, PhD student, I had to really advocate for housing, subsidized housing at UCLA. This is West LA. We're like close to Santa Monica, very expensive. I know I couldn't afford it, for sure couldn't afford it. And so I had to advocate because they were placing me on a wait list, but then I was bothering them like, I'm gonna have a baby soon and I need housing, and my partner and I need to like bring this child to the world, right? But it's not only about having children, but also like sometimes you're a caregiver for elders, or you're a caregiver for your siblings. So I learned a lot around caregiving, right? And so those responsibilities can also be helpful. Those an extra layer of responsibility. Definitely like advocate for yourself if housing is available on your campus. I know San Jose has certain resources for housing and security as well, and advocacy groups that can be supportive for down payments for apartments. And it takes a lot of paperwork, which is really difficult, right, to manage in terms of housing insecurities, but definitely like don't give up on that and just self-advocate and ask for support, right? Ask your faculty, ask administrators for support as you're advocating for yourself for housing. And I want to do a little plug. One of my good friends works for and I think there's a partnership at San Jose State, Second Harvest of Silicon Valley. So like how food insecurity is very much also part of our realities, right? And to be quite honest, even as brand new faculty, when we're in transition from like either a postdocs or other roles, like we are also like, there's a period of time when we're also like trying to make, you know, ends meet, right? Because we're transitioning. And so like never feel shame or embarrassment about needing support and resources, because we're in really difficult times, right? So these food banks exist out there. They have really great quality food. And I think I don't regret anything in terms of like trying to figure out how to like manage my housing and food insecurity. I think I learned a lot, if anything, right? So I think I had to put the shame and embarrassment behind me, because I was learning as I was going, and that's just the reality of my situation as a first gen student, but also like as a first gen parent of color in a very expensive city. And I think, yeah, that's basically all. So I don't know if each campus is different, but I know at UCLA they had an economic response team. I'm not sure if San Jose has something similar, but these economic response teams will provide resources for anything a student needs in time of crisis, whether it's housing, food, or other kinds of insecurity, even like those kind of like basically like basic needs. I think are really important for us to tap into. And I think the last plug-in is, again, I'm still, as new faculty, we're learning about the resources on campus, right? I think at UCLA, part of this economic response team, they would give out 8 vouchers for the dining halls. And so students can go eat at the dining halls. And if you had little ones going for free. So, I mean, we're in COVID times, that's probably really different and more difficult to have access to during these times, but those are the different things that exist out there.
Thanks, Professor Vega. And I just want to alert everyone that a couple of the mentors have put some really great links in the chat to the SJSU food pantry and to a housing assistance program for Santa Clara. So thank you for that. Any other comments about personal finances or tips about how to manage?
I think I would just probably go last on this one. But I think one thing I was grateful for during my master's program when I came back to the US was being in a subsidized housing, right? I didn't even know I was in a subsidized housing until when it was tax season, right? And things like that. And although, like, thinking about it, I do remember the housing lady telling me that, hey, your income is way below, I think it was way below 25K. So instead of paying $750 as your rent, you're going to be paying half of $750 as your rent because this is subsidized housing. I was like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. Let's go ahead. Anything that costs the money into too. So just thinking about it now, that was kind of like the subsidized housing. So if you could do those Google searches or even look at Facebook or even Instagram, you would find some of those houses that are subsidized. I could see some of those links in here. And I think one other stuff that was of great help to me during my grad school was the food pantry. So at Wayne State, we had the WSU food pantry, and over here, we also have the SJSU food pantry. I think forget about shame, pride, ego, any of those things. Those resources are here for every single person. So if you know you need additional support for food, just get yourself and walk over there. Keep the ego, keep the pride, keep the shame, keep them inside your car. Go get food that you can put into your tummy and maybe for your family, and proceed to the next day. I think that's how I see it. And then the other thing that kind of helped me in terms of managing my personal finances is cutting my coat according to my size. If I don't need it, I don't buy it. Simple as ABC. If you don't need it, don't buy it. Don't even think about it. Just window shopping, put it on your cart. After 2 days, take it out. And that's probably it. So, yeah.
Thanks. That's great advice. Tighten the belt. I have a little story about my own grad experience in this regard. So for me, food was the issue, right? It was hard because eating was expensive. And I was, I had a stipend, but it was a very low stipend and I could barely pay my rent with it. So I did 2 things. One thing I did was I went to all the local fast food places and I calculated the most calories per dollar that I could get. And it's totally unhealthy, but I actually did it. And maybe I'll tell you later who the winner was. It's a company that's still around. But the more rationally, what I did was I ended up sharing a living space with 5 other grad students. And what we did was we set up a pact. It's almost like a co-op where each night of the week, one of the 5 grad students would cook dinner for everyone in the house. And what we would do is on Saturday morning, we would all go to the grocery store together and buy, the week's bread and the week's food that we need for the things we're going to cook and all of that. And then we would split the bill amongst all of us. The rule was 6 o'clock every night, dinner was on the table, but prepared by one of us. You don't have to show up. No shame if you don't show up, but you're still paying your share regardless, right? And so by doing that, we actually were able to eat unbelievably cheaply. And it was actually good. It was home cooked meals 5 days a week. We were on our own on the weekends. That worked so well that I actually started doing that with my car too. I ended up buying a car that I shared with a couple of the other guys that I was living with because we don't need a full-time car. right? And so we bought this old junker and we split it 3 ways and we drove it until it sort of disappeared into the ground. And it served us well throughout our graduate experience. So those are the kinds of cooperative things that sometimes people can come up with as well. All right, any other thoughts about managing your personal finances before we go on to the last question?
I think I'll probably say I echo those comments, Mark. I also shared the house with my brothers and also the cars with my brothers, except when it comes to taking the snow from the driveway. That's a huge problem for 4 boys. So,
all right. The last question is really a SJSU specific, and it's about how can graduate students find support resources on our campus, both to access funding and resources if they get into trouble, if things start to go a bit out of control. And we've already talked about quite a few, and I'm going to add now into the chat a link. This is a link to a Google Doc. And on this Google Doc, there are just some additional links. It's not a lot of them. I think there's 5 or so. And I'll just tell you what's here, and you can go to it later for your reference if you want. The first is that there is a video that was prepared by the Financial Aid and Scholarship Office. And that might be of interest just in general terms about how do you access scholarships or loans or things like that. There's also a video that I actually prepared about the different ways to fund your graduate education. That's the CGS video on this document. The third thing is there's a link to an organization called SJSU Cares, which is an organization that helps people when they get into trouble. It could be with food insecurity, with housing insecurity. And so there's a link there. You can see what's available. There's a really interesting training module on financial literacy called iGrad, and it's linked on here as well. And then finally, there's a link to the Bursar's office where they provide short-term loans. And these are small loans. I'm talking about like $500. But if you're really stuck, and as long as there's some criteria, but as long as you meet those criteria, you might be able to access the short-term loan. So I just wanted to put that in there, and you can review those at your leisure. But now I want to turn it to the panel if they have any suggestions for other resources on campus, or if they've accessed resources that they want to share. Anyone want to chime in?
I'll just say that there are so many underutilized resources on any given college campus, SJSU nonetheless, that students don't know about, but you're absolutely entitled to them, because why you pay? You're paying consumers. And so I would say one of the best ways to find like support resources is first to connect with people, really lean on your AMOS mentors or people that you feel comfortable talking with, an academic advisor, maybe your friends or professors. Also, just perusing the university's website, signing up to be on listservs that might have newsletter updates, and just challenging yourself to stop in and check out the in-office that might interest you. Many people don't see a lot of students, so they're super eager when students come in. And again, you are entitled to go into those offices and just ask questions. Also, there are several identity-based orgs and like on-campus offices. I'm thinking about the Block, the Latinx Student Success Center, Mosaic. There's a bunch that I'm missing that are more than happy to point you in the direction to resources or help you out themselves. And then I'll put in another plug for SJSU Cares. I randomly stopped in last semester because I had no idea what this office was. And I was looking for resources to help a student, an undergraduate student of mine who was experiencing housing insecurity. And SJSU Cares, they have a new facility and they are super warm and welcoming. And I learned a bunch about a bunch of the resources that they offer. So I just wanted to echo Mark in terms of them providing services for students facing kinds of financial crisis, paying for food, housing, and other bills. So just really knowing that you as a consumer have the right to reach out to people and ask questions. And if they don't know, I'm sure that they can point you in the direction of people who do know.
Thank you, Professor Wiggins. Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll add that even your own department, or even like more veteran professors or their administrators or their staff might know and have resources that even us as new faculty are learning about. So I know for sure, like I go to a lot to Erlinda, who's been at San Jose State for a long time. She's alumni as well, and she knows a lot about resources on campus. So and you don't have to be in Chicano, Chicanx studies to get this information. She also is very much well aware of other resources. So yeah, there's never be shy to ask, right? Because they might have the answer, they might have the plugin. And I think this goes back to the same question about like RAs or TA-ships. Sometimes they know like who's looking for somebody to hire. So, you know, make friends with like, or just talk to them, right? Like Dr. Wiggins said, like they're more than happy to like answer any questions. I think we've all been really hungry for like social interaction with folks. And so when you stop by an office or email, like we're really happy, you know, to receive you and pass on the information.
Thank you. And I want to alert you that Professor Helens has put into the chat a resource for a career closet for business attire in the College of Social Sciences. And I'll add to that the Career Center has a similar program. So if, for example, you're going for an interview and you just don't have, you know, adequate business attire to wear, you can go there and utilize what they have for those purposes. Any other comments about campus resources before we turn it over to the mentees' questions?
I just have a quick side point. I'm not sure how much this will apply to everyone, but I just want to throw it out there. So like, it might be a little weird to be talking about like retirement already, but you know, on campus, they have a lot of those like seminars by Fidelity and talking about like retirement. And I'm not saying you should do this now, but when it applies, and the reason I point this up is this is one of my other regrets from grad school. So when I graduated, so because I was a TA and like an instructor for a few different grad classes, I didn't realize it at that point, but like at my grad school, they automatically enrolled us in like retirement benefits, right? Like they automatically withdrew money every month and they put it in this retirement that I didn't even know existed until literally like at least a decade later. And then when I looked into it, I looked at the history and I realized every month the retirement like fund went down. And so I called them finally after like 10 years of not realizing this account existed. And I called them, they're like, oh, well, your university didn't pick a good retirement account. So it charges like a monthly fee to maintain. So because you haven't touched it for 10 years, we've just like been draining retirement because no one's touched it. I was like, oh, that would have been good to know. No one told me this even existed. So stuff like that, like just even if you're not thinking about, obviously you're probably no one's thinking about retirement in this room, but if you do have a job where you might want to look at like the fine print of like where your like deductions are going and looking in and going to at least one retirement seminar to know like what's going on there, like what are they doing with this, and do I have to do anything? Are there like fees involved, or if I don't touch it, they're going to drain it every month? And this happened to me again when I was a postdoc. So when I was a postdoc, the school had this weird policy where they would take money automatically out of your like stipend to put into your a totally different retirement fund. But you were going to lose it if you didn't work for longer than 3 years. And I ended up being one day short of the part. I had, again, no idea until I had left. And then they started sending me mail about this like retirement account. And I was like, oh, what's this? And I called them and they're like, oh, you almost had it, but because you left one day too early, you know, you no longer have access. So 2 regrets. And I was like, oh, because like when you're in your 20s, you don't think about retirement. Even I know, like I knew people had retirement things that their employers automatically enrolled them in, but I didn't think twice. So just a word of warning, like if you are employed in any capacity and your employer does do these deductions automatically, just, you know, do your research, go to one of those seminars where they tell you what's going on, and make sure you don't, you know, you don't lose out on any money that is due to you down the line.
All right, great. Thank you, Professor McCallum. Any other thoughts on SJSU resources before we move on to mentee questions? All right, so now it's up for you. Yep, I see a question already. You can either raise your hand, in which case we'll call on you and you can ask your question live, or if you prefer, you can put it into the chat and we'll try to answer it that way. So I see Emmy, go ahead, please.
Hi, sorry, this is not, it's more general question. And I think because there has been so many wonderful resources offered in the chat box, I was wondering if later on after the session, if it will be organized and be able to be emailed to us, because I've been trying to like press every single resources, but I think it would also make it a lot easier if we're able to collect these resources in a document, if it's in an online Excel, so we can all access it anytime and look at it again later.
I think that's a great suggestion. So we have this Google Doc that I shared the link to. So if you can make sure to get the link to that one, it was at 2:59 in the chat box. What we'll do is we'll take the other links that were added and we can add them to that Google Doc after the meeting so that they'll all be compiled there. Does that sound like a good plan?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thank you, Emmy.
And then Dean Mark?
Yeah.
Another thing they could do is when you open the chat box, right? I think on the right-hand side of the chat box, there's this 3 small little dots. And when you click on it, it says save chat. So if you save the chat, even after the dean ends this meeting, the text file of the chat would be saved on, if you're using a computer, it would be saved on that computer. If you're using a phone, I don't have any idea about that, but for a computer, when you save the chat, it would be saved there. So you have all those links and everybody's comments and everything like that. So.
Great, thank you very much. That's a very helpful suggestion. Any other questions?
I have a question. For a research assistantship or for anything other than TA, is it possible to arrange tuition waiver instead of payment?
So for a TA, the tuition waiver is part of the system. There's a university policy that provides it. So that's a separate case. But you were asking about for an RA.
Or any other,
or other types.
any other campus-based kind of work opportunity.
I don't know the answer to that question. So I think that the reason is because I think that there's different answers depending on the kind of work that you're doing. So if you're a full-time university employee, then one of your benefits is to have a certain amount of access to educational resources for free as part of your employment. So if that's the category, then the answer is yes, there is a way to do that. It's not a full ride, but there is some resource available. If you're a part-time employee or a temporary employee, then I think the answer is there's no program that I know of, at least, to do that. So you'd have to discuss it with the particular employer and see if they want to find a way to do it for you instead of pay. If for some reason it's better for you to get it as a tuition remission rather than as a pay, but I can't answer the specifics in that case. I think you would have to talk specifically to the employer. The people at our university who handle general employment questions is the unit called University Personnel, and they have a website. So that would be a place to start to try to get that question answered. But I'm sorry, I don't know the answer. Maybe one of our panelists knows, but I don't.
Okay, University Personnel, should I just look up SJSU personnel?
You go to the SJSU website and then in the search box, go to university personnel and you'll find their website, and you'll probably find contact info for different kinds of things. So you just, I would say, send an email to one of those folks.
Okay. Thank you.
And I think there was a question in the chat. Let's see, I'm having a hard time monitoring the chat at the same time as moderating the discussion, but let me try. There was a question about scholarships and how to know which scholarships to trust. Does anybody want to comment on that?
That's a good question. I think sometimes financial aid offices have like a list of scholarships that they can that you can trust. Also, don't trust anything that charges you anything, like never. So that's, yeah, it's been a while since I've applied for scholarships, but I remember, like, I forget, there's a very popular one, can't remember, but it's always good to kind of like look at their website, see what the requirements are, just to kind of like get a vibe. It's really hard to tell unless somebody else has other advice. Just do some like a little bit extra legwork, right? And ask people who've gotten scholarships. And I was never really embarrassed about asking friends who've gotten funding to, like, if they're willing to share their materials, because then I pay it forward and then I share my materials with the next person who asks, right? Then that you kind of get an idea of which scholarships are out there that you can trust. But I don't know what everybody else has to say about that.
Maybe I'll just say one thing. There's two categories of scholarships to think about. One is internal scholarships, which are within SJSU, and then the other is extramural scholarships that are funded by some outside source, a foundation or something like that. And for the SJSU scholarships, the answer is easy, because you can apply for all scholarships all at once. All you have to do is fill out a financial aid application with the FASO, the Financial Aid and Scholarship Office, and they will automatically sort you to any scholarships for which you are eligible that they administer. So that's a good thing. There are a couple of caveats. One is you have to have a FASO form on file. I mean, a FAFSA form on file, sorry. Which is the federal financial aid form, or if you're undocumented, the California DREAM Act form. But as long as you have that, because that demonstrates financial need, then they can couple you with internal scholarships. For external scholarships, it's a little harder. I know that in the video that I have, the CGS video that's on that sheet that I gave you, one of the things I talk about in there are some external websites that have lists of scholarships. And so that's a place where you can find scholarships that have been sort of vetted and that they're reasonable. But I think Professor Vega's caution is really important. If anybody asks you for money to help with a scholarship, that's not legitimate. Don't do that. Professor Wiggins, I think you were about to say something and I think I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, I agree with Dr. Vega. Another related point, a little slightly different, is if you are able to secure like a consulting position or a research assistantship position outside with an outside organization, for example, sometimes these funders, they don't automatically take out taxes, and then you're responsible during tax season to repay the amount that wasn't taken out. This is something that absolutely happened to me. I was a research assistant at a college in Massachusetts, a small liberal arts college. They didn't take tax out, so I was getting the full stipend, and then tax season came and I owed the taxes associated with my work. So that's something else to just keep in mind. If you are able to get paid and have a funding source, really be mindful to, set aside the money that you might have to, pay the IRS later on, and really, talk to the university personnel and folks in human resources, because they'll be able to direct you when it comes to matters like that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Dr. Wiggins. That's really important. Those bills can be surprising. Any other panelists want to talk about how to discern good scholarships. Maybe I'll make one other comment, which is that one of the things we've talked about in this AMAS program in general is communities of support. And I think several of the panelists today have mentioned that talking to the people in your area or other members of your community of support can be a really good way to get good ideas about funding mechanisms and about which scholarships are appropriate for your field. So if you're in psychology, there's a special set of scholarships that might be most appropriate for a psychology student. So this, I guess what I'm saying is that it's most beneficial if you use that community of support for all of the questions that you have. Sometimes people are embarrassed to talk about money. They're embarrassed to talk about funding. Don't be. That's exactly the kind of thing that a more seasoned person in your field or a mentor can really help with. So, and I think that's a theme that's coming out too. I think Professor Sjsu was really, pointing that out. Don't be embarrassed about this. All of us have struggled with financial issues. It's absolutely normal. So, talk to people who know what they're talking about and get some advice. Any other questions? There's a bit of a conversation in the chat about the stipend for students who participate in the AMAS program. And I will tell you, yes, there's a small stipend that we're paying for students who participate. I will also tell you that it is extremely difficult for us to pay that stipend because there are many different student populations, and paying the stipend is through a different mechanism depending upon exactly whether you're an employee of the university or not an employee, and what your visa status is, and all of these kinds of things are issues. So there have been some delays, let's just say, and but I hope that you will all get your stipend in the not too distant future if you haven't already received it. I think it's a relatively modest stipend. I think it's $150. Let's see, any other questions? All right, I'm not seeing any other questions, and the chat is going by kind of fast, but I didn't see one. Did I miss something? Let's see. Does Sjsu have any resources for help with filing taxes? That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. Does anybody else know? You know what? That's a great question. I'm going to try to find out. I don't know the answer. I'll try to find out. And if I find something, I'll put a link in that same Google Doc. All right. Well, last call for questions. All right, let's close it out then. We're somehow miraculously right on time. The way we would like to end maybe is by having folks sort of summarize any lessons learned, any take-homes, anything that they'd like to share after this panel. So this could be either the mentors, the panelists, or the mentees. Does anyone have any take-homes or anything that they particularly struck them about this panel and this information?
I just want to nod at the conversation earlier about how overwhelming this is. We see you, we want to validate that. Now I'm feeling a little like stressed about my retirement. So thank you, Dr. McCallum. I'm like, oh, I need to go check on something. So I feel that, and we see you.
I think I would just add to what Dr. Vega has stated with maybe some very simple sentences that information is power, right? So we all came here with individual ideas, but you could see the power we're getting from putting all those ideas together. And that's why some of us feel stressed out or overwhelmed or stuff like that. But now you have this information. How you use this information to act and make good decisions for yourself, it's up to each and every one of us. So
Powerful words, Professor Etu. Thank you.
And I guess just one encouraging thing that I want to sort of highlight in case it wasn't obvious, like when I look back on like my time in grad school and postdoc, as financially difficult as that period was, I still consider it one of like the sweetest and most rewarding and special times of my life. And I think that, like, I know we spent this past hour and a half focusing a lot on like all the financial challenges that comes with this time, but I feel like at the same time, yeah, you might be poor, but there's no other time where you get to spend all day learning and being with like-minded people who are invested in learning and trying to change the world. And eventually you'll go into the real world and you'll have jobs and like more responsibilities, and you'll probably make way more money than you have now. But I think there is something truly sweet and lovely about this time where you are struggling, but it's with a bunch of other people who are also struggling, but also like here for really good and idealistic and powerful reasons. So I think that's my word of encouragement. It's still a really sweet time. When I would think back on my like grad school years, I don't think about the poverty. I think about the friendships, the relationships, the experiences, and the stuff I learned. And I hope it's the same for you guys too.
And I'd like to add, a lot of times people don't like to talk about finances. So I'm just happy that there's a space to demystify these experiences. And I hope you all got to see that, the lines aren't so far from each other. From being a junior faculty member and a graduate student, we're all a part of the same struggle. And I would just like to reiterate to really lean on folks that you are close to, find communities of support, reach out to us. I'm more than happy to connect with each and every one of you all.
Thank you very much. Any final thoughts? I'll just say one small thing in response to what Professor Helens said, which is that in addition to it being a sweet time, and I totally agree, my grad school days in retrospect were some of the most invigorating and exciting times of my life. But beyond that, by going to graduate school, you are assuring a better financial future. That if you had not gone to grad school, you would be making money out there in the world probably if you're employed. But by going to grad school, all the evidence shows the investment of time and money that you're spending right now will more than pay for itself. And within a few years, you'll be in a better place than you would have been if you hadn't gone. So it's an investment. And so it's not only a sweet and wonderful time, but it's also a financially enabling event. So I just wanted to say that. If there are no further questions, then I just want to thank everybody for coming to this event. And most of all, I want to thank our panelists for really opening up and sharing their enthusiasm for the mentoring program and their wisdom about their graduate experiences and what they've learned from all of that. So thank you all. This video will be available to the AMAS mentees and mentors in the future once we get it set up. And I look forward to seeing you all at the next panel. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye.